The wine glass shattered against the marble floor, red liquid spreading like blood across the pristine white tiles. My mother-in-law stood over me, her face twisted with rage, and said the words that would haunt me for months. "You barren waste of space! Get out of my son's life!" My husband Alexander stood beside her, silent. His eyes met mine for just a moment before he looked away. That silence told me everything I needed to know. After 3 years of marriage, after countless fertility treatments, after absorbing their blame and their cruelty, I was being thrown out like garbage. They didn't know that their rejection would be the catalyst that would change everything. They didn't know that the struggling interior designer they dismissed would become the woman who would reshape their entire world. My name is Victoria Hayes, though soon everyone would know me by another name entirely. I'm 31 years old, and until that night, I had been trying desperately to be the perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect wife, the perfect woman they wanted me to be. I had sacrificed my career, my dreams, and my sense of self to fit into their idea of what I should be. And it still wasn't enough. Before I tell you what happened after they threw me out, before I tell you about the empire I built from nothing and the revenge that came naturally as a consequence of my success, let me tell you how I got here. This is Revenge Stories, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Help us build this community so we can bring more interesting and exciting stories for you from around the world. Your help is much appreciated. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. I met Alexander Thornton at a charity gala 6 years ago. I was there as part of the design team that had created the event space, transforming an old industrial warehouse into an elegant venue with draped fabrics, strategic lighting, and vintage furniture pieces I had sourced from estate sales. I was wearing a simple black dress I had bought on sale, standing near the back, watching guests admire the space I had created without knowing I was the one who designed it. Alexander approached me with champagne in hand and a smile that seemed genuine. He was handsome in that polished way that money creates, with perfect teeth and perfectly styled hair. He told me the space was beautiful, that whoever designed it had real talent. When I told him it was me, his smile widened. He said he knew talent when he saw it, that his family owned a commercial real estate development company, and that they were always looking for fresh creative minds. That's how it started, with compliments and opportunity, with attention from a man whose family name appeared on buildings across the city. He pursued me with the kind of focus that felt flattering at the time, though looking back, I realize it was just another business acquisition to him. We dated for 6 months before he proposed. His mother, Patricia Thornton, had been polite but distant during our courtship. His father, Robert Thornton, barely acknowledged my existence. But Alexander assured me they would warm up once we were married, once I was officially part of the family. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. The wedding was spectacular, held at the Thornton estate, a sprawling property with manicured gardens and a ballroom that could hold 300 guests. Patricia planned everything, dismissing most of my suggestions with a tight smile and comments like, "We know how these things are done, dear." I wore the dress she chose, walked down the aisle she designed, and smiled for photos that would be framed and displayed in their home, proof of their continued dynasty. The problems started almost immediately. On our honeymoon in the Maldives, Alexander spent most of his time on his phone, managing some crisis at the company. When I suggested we take a day away from technology to actually enjoy our honeymoon, he looked at me like I had suggested something absurd. "Victoria, the business doesn't stop just because we're on vacation. You need to understand that this is how it works. I told myself it was just the adjustment period that all newlyweds went through this. When we returned home, Alexander had arranged for us to live in the guest house on his parents' property, a beautifully appointed cottage that felt more like a gilded cage than a home. It's just temporary, he assured me, until we find the right place to buy. But temporary stretched into months, then a year, then longer. And every day I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and quieter, trying to take up less space in a world where I was constantly reminded that I didn't quite belong. Patricia began joining us for breakfast unannounced. She would walk into our cottage without knocking, already criticizing something before she had fully entered the room. "Victoria, are you really going to wear that to the company luncheon? It's so bohemian." Or, "Alexander, darling, I brought you some proper coffee. I know Victoria tries, but she never quite gets it right. I was still working as an interior designer when we first married, taking on small residential projects and slowly building my portfolio. I loved the work, the challenge of taking someone's vision and making it real, of transforming spaces into something beautiful and functional. But Patricia made it clear that working was inappropriate for a Thornton wife. "We have a certain image to maintain," she said one morning over breakfast that I hadn't invited her to. The wife of a Thornton executive should be focused on supporting her husband's career, on hosting, on charity work, not running around with fabric swatches like a decorator. "Interior designer," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." Her smile was ice. "Is there?" Alexander said nothing. He just buttered his toast and looked at his phone, letting his mother's words stand unchallenged. That became the pattern. Patricia would criticize, insult, or undermine me, and Alexander would remain silent, his passivity a form of agreement. I gave up my design work 6 months into our marriage. It wasn't a dramatic decision, just a slow erosion of my confidence and independence. Projects became harder to manage when Patricia would schedule family obligations during my client meetings. When I explained I had work commitments, she would look wounded and say things like, "I suppose we're just not as important as your little projects." Eventually, it became easier to just stop taking on new clients. I told myself it was temporary, that once we moved into our own place, once I had established myself in the family, I could return to the work I loved. I didn't realize I was giving up the one thing that made me feel like myself. The baby pressure started almost immediately. Patricia brought it up at family dinners, at social events, in casual conversation that wasn't casual at all. "When are you going to give us grandchildren, Victoria? Alexander needs an heir. The family line must continue." I tried to smile through it, to brush it off with vague comments about timing and not rushing things, but the pressure mounted. Alexander started talking about it too, not as something we wanted together, but as an obligation, a next step in the family plan. We tried for a year with no success, then another year. Patricia's comments became sharper, more pointed. "Is there something wrong with you, Victoria? Have you seen a doctor? Perhaps you should try harder, eat better, exercise more, or less. I don't know, but clearly something isn't working." I went to specialists. I underwent tests, procedures, treatments that were invasive and painful and emotionally devastating. Alexander came to one appointment out of a dozen. When the doctors suggested he should also be tested, he refused. "There's nothing wrong with me," he said firmly. "The problem is obviously on your side." His certainty was absolute, and his family's support of that certainty was unwavering. I was the broken one. I was the failure. I was the woman who couldn't perform the one function they deemed important. The fertility treatments became my life. Hormone injections that made me feel crazy, procedures that were clinical and cold, hope that would spike with each cycle and then crash when my period arrived. I gained weight from the hormones. I cried constantly. I felt like my body was betraying me, like I was betraying everyone by not being able to do this one simple thing that women had been doing forever. Patricia's criticisms intensified. At family gatherings, she would make pointed comments about other women who knew how to give their husbands children. She would talk loudly about friends whose daughters in law had just announced pregnancies, looking directly at me while she did it. Some women are just naturally fertile, she would say. It's such a blessing when things work the way they're supposed to. Alexander stopped touching me except during my fertile windows, and even then it felt mechanical, obligatory. We stopped talking about anything except my cycle, my temperature, my hormone levels. I became a walking fertility chart, not a wife, not a partner, just a failed vessel. I remember one particularly awful family dinner when Patricia announced that Alexander's cousin had just had her third child. 3 beautiful boys, Patricia gushed. Her husband must be so proud. Of course, some women are just built for motherhood. It's in their nature. She looked at me across the table, her eyes cold despite her smile. And some women, well, perhaps they're meant for other things, though I can't imagine what that would be. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried silently in a stall, mascara running down my face, trying to compose myself enough to return to the table. When I came back, no one acknowledged my absence or my red eyes. The conversation had moved on to business matters, to things that actually mattered to them. 3 years into our marriage, my doctor delivered news that should have been good but felt devastating given the circumstances. Victoria, there's nothing wrong with you. Your hormone levels are normal. Your eggs are healthy. Everything looks good. I really think we should test Alexander. Sometimes male factor infertility is the issue, and we need to explore that possibility. I went home and told Alexander what the doctor had said. I tried to be gentle, tried to present it as something we should do together, as a team. His reaction was immediate and cold. I'm not the problem, Victoria. My mother had 3 children. There's no history of infertility in my family. This is clearly your issue, even if your doctor is too politically correct to say so. But the tests show— I don't care what the tests show, he interrupted. I'm not going to be poked and prodded because you can't do what women are supposed to do naturally. That night, lying in bed next to a man who felt like a stranger, I realized something terrible. I didn't want to have his baby. I didn't want to bring a child into this cold, cruel family. I didn't want to bind myself to these people forever. The thought terrified me, because if I wasn't trying to have a baby, what was I doing here? What was the point of any of this? The final breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late October. Alexander had called to say he was bringing his parents over for dinner, giving me less than an hour's notice. I rushed to prepare something acceptable, knowing that whatever I made would be criticized, but trying anyway. I made salmon with roasted vegetables and a quinoa salad, something healthy and presentable. I set the table with the china Patricia had given us, the crystal glasses, the cloth napkins. I changed into a dress that Patricia had once said was almost appropriate. I tried to make everything perfect, knowing it wouldn't be enough, but trying anyway, because that's what I had been doing for 3 years, trying and failing and trying again. They arrived exactly on time. Patricia swept into the cottage without knocking, as always, Robert following behind her, Alexander bringing up the rear. Patricia's eyes immediately began scanning the space, looking for things to criticize. Victoria, dear, you've set the table with the winter china. It's still autumn. Honestly, don't they teach you people these things? I wanted to say that you people wasn't appropriate, that I wasn't some outsider who needed to be taught basic civilization, But I had learned that defending myself only made things worse, so I apologized and began switching out the plates. "Leave it," Patricia said with a dismissive wave. "It's done now." Though really, Victoria, after 3 years, one would think you'd have learned something about proper entertaining. Dinner was tense, as it always was. Patricia dominated the conversation, talking about business matters I wasn't included in, about people I didn't know, about a world I was adjacent to, but never truly part of. Robert grunted occasionally in agreement. Alexander nodded along, contributing when directly addressed, but otherwise letting his mother orchestrate the evening. I ate silently, pushing food around my plate, feeling invisible despite being the one who had prepared everything. I had become very good at making myself invisible, at taking up as little space as possible, at not drawing attention that would invite criticism. Then, Patricia shifted the conversation with surgical precision to the topic she always returned to. "Robert and I had lunch with the Hendersons today. Their daughter just announced her pregnancy. That will be their second grandchild." She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. "We still don't have any." The silence that followed was loaded with accusation. I felt my chest tighten, felt the familiar shame rising like bile in my throat. I had been through 6 rounds of IVF in the past year, 6 expensive, painful, emotionally devastating rounds that had all failed. My body was exhausted, my spirit was broken, and still, it wasn't enough. "We're still trying," I said quietly, the words automatic now, the response I had learned to give. "Are you?" Patricia's voice was sharp. "Or are you just going through the motions? Because from where I'm sitting, Victoria, it seems like you're not really committed to this. Some women want to be mothers. They do whatever it takes. They make sacrifices. They put their family first." "I have put the family first," I said, my voice still quiet, but with an edge now, 3 years of suppressed frustration beginning to leak through. "I've given up my career. I've undergone countless procedures. I've done everything the doctors have asked. "You've failed," Patricia interrupted, her voice cutting through mine like a knife. "Let's just say it plainly, shall we? You've failed to do the one thing that actually matters, the one thing Alexander needs from a wife." "Mother," Alexander said, but it wasn't a reprimand. It was a weak, half-hearted protest that had no force behind it. "Don't mother me, Alexander," Patricia snapped. "We've been patient. We've been understanding. We've paid for treatments that clearly aren't working. At some point, we have to face reality." "What reality is that?" I asked, and I could hear the tremor in my own voice, could feel myself starting to shake. Patricia stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked around the table until she was standing directly over me, looking down with an expression of pure disdain. "The reality that you are not capable of giving this family what it needs. The reality that you are a disappointment, a failure, a waste of the Thornton name." "Patricia, that's enough," Robert said, but even his intervention was mild, more form than substance. "It's not nearly enough," Patricia continued. "We've wasted 3 years on this girl. 3 years of hoping she would prove us wrong, that she would show some value beyond her mediocre looks and her working-class background. But she hasn't. She's been nothing but a drain on this family's resources and patience." I stood up, my legs unsteady, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "I'm standing right here," I said, my voice stronger now, despite the tears starting to blur my vision. "You're talking about me like I'm not even in the room." "That's because you barely register as being here," Patricia said, her words precise and cruel. "You've been a ghost in this family from the beginning. Present, but not contributing. Taking up space, but offering nothing of value." I looked at Alexander, silently begging him to say something, to defend me, to stand up for me even once. He was looking at his plate, his jaw tight, his hands clasped in front of him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Alexander," I said, his name coming out as a plea. "Are you going to let her talk to me like this?" He finally looked up, and what I saw in his face broke something fundamental inside me. It wasn't anger or even discomfort. It was resignation. It was agreement. He believed everything his mother was saying. He had probably always believed it. "Victoria," he said quietly, "maybe we do need to have a serious conversation about our future." "Our future?" I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "What does that mean?" Patricia answered for him, her voice triumphant now that her son had finally showed his true colors. "It means that this arrangement isn't working. It means that you are not what this family needs. It means—" She picked up her wine glass and, for a moment, I thought she was going to take a sip. Instead, she threw it. The glass shattered against the floor at my feet, red wine splashing across my dress, across the white tiles, spreading like blood. "It means get out!" Patricia screamed, her composed facade finally cracking to reveal the ugliness beneath. "Get out of this house! Get out of this family! Get out of my son's life, you barren waste of space!" The words hung in the air, echoing in the sudden, terrible silence. I looked at the shattered glass, at the wine spreading across the floor, at my ruined dress. I looked at Robert, who was staring at his wife with what might have been surprise but wasn't intervention. I looked at Alexander, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. "You're going to let her do this?" I asked him, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're going to let her throw me out like garbage?" Alexander finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the truth I had been denying for 3 years. I had never been his partner. I had been a project, an acquisition, something to check off his list. And now that I had failed to perform as expected, I was disposable. "Maybe it's for the best," he said quietly. "Maybe we both need to move on." Something inside me shattered along with that wine glass. Not my heart. I don't think I had loved Alexander for a long time, if I ever really had. What shattered was my denial, my hope that things could get better, my willingness to accept crumbs of dignity from people who saw me as less than human. I walked to our bedroom, my feet crunching over broken glass. I pulled out the suitcase I had brought to this cottage 3 years ago, still tucked in the back of our closet. I packed methodically, taking only what was mine from before the marriage. My clothes, my books, my laptop, my portfolio of design work I hadn't looked at in 2 years. Patricia stood in the doorway watching me pack, her arms crossed, a satisfied smile on her face. "You're finally showing some sense," she said. "This is the first intelligent decision you've made since you tricked my son into marrying you." I didn't respond. I didn't cry. I just kept packing. Alexander appeared in the doorway next to his mother, watching silently as I dismantled the life I had been trying to build here. He didn't offer to help. He didn't ask me to stay. He just watched. When my suitcase was full, I zipped it closed and pulled it off the bed. I walked past Patricia, past Alexander, past Robert, who was still sitting at the dining table surrounded by the ruins of dinner. I walked out the door of the cottage without looking back. I had $37 in my checking account. The rest of our money was in joint accounts that Alexander controlled, accounts I had stupidly never paid attention to because I had trusted him to be fair, to be decent. I had no job, no income, no family in the city. My parents had passed away in a car accident when I was in college, and I had no siblings. The friends I'd had before the marriage had drifted away during my 3 years in the Thornton bubble, tired of canceled plans, and my increasing isolation. I drove my 8-year-old sedan, the one Patricia had constantly criticized as inappropriate for a Thornton, to the only place I could think of, my old studio apartment. I had kept it when Alexander and I married, unable to fully let go of my independence despite his pressure to sell it. "We don't need it," he had said. "You're living with me now." But something had made me hold on to it, some instinct for self-preservation that I'm grateful for now. I had been renting it out for the past 3 years to cover the mortgage, and the current tenant's lease had just ended 2 weeks ago. I had been planning to finally list it for sale, to fully commit to my life as a Thornton. Thank God I hadn't. The apartment was empty, dusty, smaller than I remembered. It was a studio with a kitchenette in one corner and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it was mine. Fully paid off with money I had earned before I met Alexander. It was the only thing in my life that was completely, entirely mine. I sat on the floor in the empty space and finally let myself cry. Not delicate tears, but huge, gasping sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the 3 years I had wasted. I cried for the woman I had been before, the one with confidence and dreams and a career she loved. I cried for the humiliation, for the cruelty, for the person I had let myself become in the desperate attempt to be accepted by people who would never accept me. I cried until I had no tears left, until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen. And then, sitting in that empty apartment with my suitcase beside me and $37 to my name, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg Alexander to take me back. I wasn't going to try to win over his family. I wasn't going to waste another moment of my life seeking approval from people who saw me as worthless. I was going to rebuild. I was going to become the person I should have been all along. I just had no idea how. Not yet. I spent the first night in my empty apartment lying on the floor in my coat, using my suitcase as a pillow. I was too exhausted to think, too numb to feel anything beyond a distant gratitude that I had a roof over my head at all. The heating hadn't been turned on since the last tenant moved out, and the October night was cold. I shivered through broken sleep, waking every few hours to the unfamiliar sounds of the building, to the reality of my situation crashing over me again and again. Morning came gray and harsh through the dusty windows. I had no furniture, no food, no coffee, nothing but the contents of one suitcase and the overwhelming question of what came next. I pulled out my phone and saw 17 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, probably a lawyer representing Alexander, and 3 text messages from my old friend Simone, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Simone's messages were brief. Heard what happened. Coffee, my treat, no judgment. Just coffee. I stared at the messages for a long time. Simone and I had been close before my marriage, both of us struggling designers trying to build our careers in a competitive city. We had shared studio space, collaborated on projects, stayed up late drinking cheap wine and dreaming about the day we would have real clients and real budgets. When I married Alexander, I had slowly stopped returning her calls, stopped showing up to our coffee meetings, let the friendship dissolve in the face of Patricia's disapproval of my inappropriate artist friends. I typed back, "Coffee sounds perfect. When and where?" We met at a small cafe near her current studio, a space I had never seen because I hadn't been part of her life for so long. Simone was there when I arrived, her curly black hair pulled back in a colorful scarf, her dark skin glowing even in the gray morning light, wearing paint-splattered jeans and a vintage blazer that somehow looked both casual and put together. She looked like herself, authentic and free, and I felt a sharp pang of envy for the person she had remained while I had lost myself. She stood when she saw me and pulled me into a tight hug without saying anything. The kindness of it, the simple human warmth of it after years of cold formality with the Thorntons, made my eyes burn with fresh tears. "I ordered you a latte," she said when we sat down. "Extra shot. You look like you need it." "How did you hear?" I asked, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. "Olivia mentioned it. She's still connected to that social scene. Word travels fast when a Thornton marriage falls apart." Simone's expression was sympathetic, but not pitying. "I'm sorry, Victoria, for what happened, but between you and me, I'm not sorry you're out of there." "You never liked Alexander," I said. It wasn't a question. "I never liked what you became around Alexander," Simone corrected gently. "You dimmed yourself for him, for them." The Victoria I knew was fierce and talented and full of ideas. The woman you became in that marriage was quiet and apologetic and scared. I hated watching it. Her honesty stung, but it was also refreshing. No one in the Thornton world ever said what they really meant. Everything was veiled in politeness and passive aggression. "I don't know what to do now," I admitted. "I have no job, barely any money, nothing but an empty apartment and a design portfolio that's 3 years out of date." "So you start over," Simone said simply. "You rebuild. You remember who you were before them and you become that person again. Better than that person." "That's easy to say." "It's not easy at all," Simone interrupted. "It's going to be hard as hell. But Victoria, you were talented. You are talented. That didn't disappear just because you stopped using it. You just need to remember how." We talked for 2 hours. Simone told me about her work, the small residential project she was taking on, the boutique hotel she had just finished. Designing that was getting attention in design magazines. She told me about the industry changes I had missed, the new trends, the shifting market. She talked and I listened, feeling something that had been dormant for 3 years starting to wake up inside me. "I have a friend who's looking for someone to redesign her bakery," Simone said as we were leaving. "It's small. The budget is tiny, but it's work. Real work. Want me to give her your number?" I wanted to say yes immediately, but doubt held me back. "I don't know if I'm ready. What if I'm not good anymore? What if I've forgotten how?" Simone grabbed my shoulders and looked me directly in the eyes. "Victoria Hayes, stop that. You were one of the best designers I knew. You had instincts, vision, the ability to see what a space could become. That's not something you forget. It's like riding a bike. You might be shaky at first, but it comes back. Say yes." "Yes," I whispered. "Yes. Tell her yes." The bakery project saved me in more ways than one. The owner, a warm woman named Carmen Rodriguez with a laugh that filled her entire shop, wanted to update her 20-year-old space to attract a younger clientele while keeping the neighborhood charm that had made her business successful. She had a budget of $5,000 and a timeline of 6 weeks. It was the kind of project I would have turned down when I was married to Alexander, too small, too constrained. Now it felt like a lifeline. I threw myself into the work with a desperate intensity. I measured every inch of the space, took hundreds of photos, filled notebooks with sketches and ideas. I couldn't afford new furniture, so I scoured estate sales, thrift stores, and online marketplaces for pieces I could refurbish. I learned to use power tools, stripping and refinishing tables myself because I couldn't afford to hire anyone. I painted walls at midnight because that's when Carmen closed and gave me access. I worked 18-hour days, partially because the project demanded it, but mostly because work was the only thing keeping me from drowning in the reality of my situation. When I was choosing paint colors or figuring out how to maximize the natural light or arranging the seating layout, I wasn't thinking about my failed marriage or my uncertain future. I was just creating, just solving problems, just being useful in a way that felt real and earned. Carmen watched me work with a mixture of amusement and concern. Mija, you're going to work yourself to death, she said one night, finding me at 2 in the morning, putting the final touches on a custom shelving unit I had built. I'm fine, I lied, though I was exhausted to my bones. You're running from something, Carmen said, not unkindly. I understand running, but eventually you have to stop and face it. Not yet, I said. I'm not ready yet. The bakery transformation was completed in 5.5 weeks. The space was unrecognizable, warm and modern while retaining its neighborhood charm with custom touches that made it unique. I had sourced vintage light fixtures and refurbished them. I had created a feature wall with reclaimed wood. I had designed a display case area that showcased Carmen's beautiful pastries while maximizing customer flow. On opening day, Carmen cried, "It's perfect," she said, hugging me tightly. "It's exactly what I wanted but didn't know how to ask for. You're a magician, Victoria." I wasn't a magician. I was just a designer who had remembered how to see possibilities in empty spaces. But her words meant everything. Carmen posted photos of the new space on social media, tagging me and writing a glowing review. Within a week, I had 3 inquiries about design projects. Within a month, I had 5 paying clients. They were all small jobs, a boutique update, a restaurant refresh, a home office conversion. But they were mine. I was working again, building again, becoming myself again. I bought an air mattress for my apartment, then a folding table to use as a desk, then a cheap coffee maker. Slowly, with each paycheck, I rebuilt not just my space, but my life. I reconnected with old contacts in the design world. I started attending industry events again, networking, putting myself out there in a way I hadn't done in years. 6 months after Patricia threw that wine glass, I was fully booked with projects for the next 3 months. A year after that, I had hired my first assistant and was turning down work because I couldn't take on any more. 18 months after being thrown out with nothing, I was being featured in a local design magazine as an emerging talent to watch. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Thorntons had thrown me out because I was worthless, because I had nothing to offer. In doing so, they had freed me to become exactly who I was meant to be. Their rejection had been the best thing that ever happened to me. I didn't think about Alexander or his family often. When I did, it was with a distant sense of gratitude mixed with lingering anger. They had damaged me, yes, but they hadn't destroyed me. If anything, I had emerged stronger, more focused, more authentically myself than I had ever been. Then, 2 years after that terrible dinner, I received a phone call that would change everything. "Miss Hayes, this is Jonathan Martinez from Sterling Properties. I'm calling about a design opportunity we think you'd be perfect for." Sterling Properties was one of the largest commercial development firms in the city, known for high-end luxury projects and deep connections to old money families. I had sent them my portfolio months ago with no response, assuming they weren't interested. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my voice professional despite the flutter of excitement. "We're developing a new mixed-use property downtown. It's going to be the flagship project for our company. Luxury condos, high-end retail, a boutique hotel. We're looking for someone to handle the interior design for the common areas in the hotel. Your portfolio caught our attention. We think you have the vision we're looking for." This was the kind of project that could make a career. The kind of opportunity I had dreamed about before I met Alexander, before I lost myself. "I'm very interested," I said. "When can we meet?" "How about tomorrow, 2 o'clock? I'll send you the address." I hung up the phone and just stood there in my now fully furnished studio apartment, my small but thriving design business humming around me, and realized that something was shifting. This was more than just another project. This was the door to something bigger. I had no idea how right I was. I had no idea that Sterling Properties' flagship project was funded by investors including Robert Thornton. I had no idea that my work was about to intersect with the family that had thrown me away in ways none of us could have anticipated. I had no idea that my revenge, when it came, would be the sweetest kind. The revenge of becoming exactly who I was always meant to be, while they watched from the sidelines, realizing too late what they had lost. The Sterling Properties office was in one of those glass towers downtown that I used to look at from the outside, never imagining I would be meeting with executives on the 40th floor. Jonathan Martinez turned out to be a sharp, efficient man in his mid-40s with silver-threaded hair and an easy smile that didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. He was flanked by two other executives and an architect whose name I recognized from award-winning projects across the state. They walked me through the vision for the Meridian Complex, as they called it, a 20-story tower that would redefine luxury living in the city. The lobby alone was going to be 3 stories high with a glass atrium. The boutique hotel would occupy floors 2 through 8, with the condos above. They wanted someone who could create spaces that felt both timeless and contemporary, elegant but warm, exclusive yet welcoming. "We've looked at dozens of portfolios," Jonathan said, sliding renderings across the conference table. "But yours stood out. That bakery project you did? The way you transformed a neighborhood institution while honoring its history? That's the kind of thinking we need. We want spaces that tell a story, not just showcase expensive furniture." I felt a surge of pride. Carmen's little bakery, the project I had poured my broken heart into, was opening doors I had never imagined. "I appreciate your confidence," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This is exactly the kind of project I've been hoping to work on." "There's one thing you should know," Jonathan said, his expression becoming more serious. "This project has multiple investors, including some prominent local families. The Thornton family, for instance, has a significant stake." My blood went cold. I kept my face carefully neutral. Years of practice with Patricia's criticisms serving me well now. "I see. Is that going to be a problem?" Jonathan asked, watching me carefully. "I understand you were previously married to Alexander Thornton. We do our research." I took a breath, considering my options. I could walk away, protect myself from potential drama, keep my distance from the family that had hurt me. Or I could take this opportunity, prove my worth on the biggest stage possible, and show them exactly what they had thrown away. "It's not a problem," I said firmly. "My personal history is separate from my professional capabilities. If you want the best design for this project, I can deliver it regardless of who's writing the checks." Jonathan smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Welcome to the Meridian Complex, Miss Hayes. Let's create something extraordinary." The contract I signed was for more money than I had made in my entire career up to that point. The timeline was aggressive. 18 months from concept to completion. I would be working directly with the architectural team, the construction managers, and yes, occasionally with the investor group. Jonathan assured me that my interactions with the Thorntons would be minimal, mostly limited to quarterly presentations. Alexander was apparently too busy with other company matters to be deeply involved in this project. I threw myself into the Meridian Complex with even more intensity than I had brought to Carmen's bakery. This wasn't just about the money or the prestige, though both mattered. This was about proving something. To Sterling Properties, to the industry, to myself, and yes, to the Thorntons who had declared me worthless. I assembled a team. Simone came on as my associate designer, bringing her incredible eye for color and texture. I hired Marcus Chen, a recent graduate with brilliant technical skills and fresh ideas. We rented a proper studio space, filled it with samples and mood boards and models. We worked day and night, pushing each other, challenging each other, creating something truly special. The hotel design came together first. I wanted it to feel like a sanctuary in the middle of the city. Natural materials, soft lighting, spaces that encouraged you to slow down and breathe. We used sustainable materials wherever possible, local artists for custom pieces, a color palette inspired by the coastal landscape just outside the city. Each floor had its own subtle variation, so returning guests would have new discoveries each visit. For the lobby and common areas, I designed something bolder, a statement space that would make people stop and stare while still feeling welcoming. A living wall of plants 3 stories high, water features that provided sound without overwhelming conversation, seating areas that worked for both business meetings and romantic encounters. 3 months into the project, I had my first presentation to the full investor group. Jonathan had warned me that Robert Thornton would be there, possibly Patricia as well. Alexander was supposedly traveling for business and wouldn't attend. I prepared meticulously, rehearsing every word, anticipating every question. The presentation room at Sterling Properties was set up like a small theater, with my renderings and samples displayed on boards around the space, and a large screen for the digital presentation. Investors filed in, wealthy men and women in expensive suits, the kind of people who made decisions that shaped the city skyline. And then they walked in. Robert Thornton, looking older than I remembered, his face lined with stress, and Patricia, immaculate as always in a cream-colored suit, her hair perfectly styled, her expression composed and cold. She saw me and stopped dead. For just a moment, her composed mask slipped, and I saw shock, then recognition, then something that looked almost like fear. Then the mask was back, and she walked to her seat without acknowledging me at all. I felt my heart pounding, but I kept my face professional, detached. I wasn't the woman who had cowered at her dinner table anymore. I was the lead designer on a $20 million project, and I had work to present. Jonathan introduced me with genuine warmth, praising my portfolio and expressing confidence in my vision for the project. Then it was my turn. I stepped to the front of the room and began. I talked them through the concept, the inspiration, the careful balance between luxury and livability. I showed them renderings that Marcus had spent weeks perfecting, samples of the materials we wanted to use, a detailed budget breakdown that showed we could achieve this vision within the allocated funds. I spoke with confidence, with passion, with the authority of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The questions came fast and sharp. Why this material over that one? How would we handle the timeline? What about maintenance costs? I answered each one thoroughly, my preparation paying off. I saw heads nodding, saw interest and approval in most faces. Patricia sat stone-faced through the entire presentation, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Robert looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, avoiding eye contact with me. They didn't ask a single question. When I finished, Jonathan opened the floor for final comments. A woman I didn't know, one of the other investors, spoke first. This is exceptional work. The vision is clear, the execution plan is solid, and frankly, this is the most cohesive design concept we've seen. I'm enthusiastically in favor. Other investors echoed her sentiment. The energy in the room was positive, excited even. Then Patricia raised her hand. I have concerns, she said, her voice cutting through the enthusiasm like ice. About Miss Hayes's experience level. This is an enormous project, and from what I can see, she's mostly done small residential work. A bakery, some boutiques. This is far beyond her capabilities. The room went quiet. Everyone knew who Patricia Thornton was, knew the weight her family name carried. Jonathan glanced at me, a question in his eyes. How do you want to handle this? I met Patricia's gaze directly, remembering every humiliation, every cruel word, every moment she had made me feel small. And I smiled, professional and cool. Mrs. Thornton raises a valid concern, I said, my voice steady. It's true that my portfolio includes smaller projects. That's where every designer starts. But let's talk about those projects. The bakery you mentioned? That redesign increased Carmen Rodriguez's revenue by 40% in the first year. The boutique hotel I did in the Arts District? It's fully booked months in advance and has been featured in 3 national design magazines. Every project I've completed has come in on budget and on schedule, with clients who become enthusiastic advocates for my work. I pulled up a slide I had prepared for exactly this kind of challenge, a list of my completed projects, their budgets, timelines, and outcomes. You're right that I haven't designed a project of this exact scale before, but Sterling Properties didn't hire me for my experience with large projects. They hired me for my vision, my problem-solving abilities, and my track record of transforming spaces into something extraordinary. I've spent 3 months preparing for this project. I've consulted with experts in every relevant field. I've built a team of talented professionals, and I've created a design that will not just meet your expectations, but exceed them. I paused, holding Patricia's gaze. If you have specific concerns about the design itself, I'm happy to address them. But if your concern is simply that you don't think I'm qualified, then I respectfully suggest you look at the work rather than making assumptions about the person doing it. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's face had gone red, a flush creeping up her neck. Robert was staring at his hands. The other investors were looking between Patricia and me, reading the subtext even if they didn't know the full story. Jonathan cleared his throat. Unless there are specific design concerns, I think we should move to a vote, all in favor of moving forward with Miss Hayes's design concept. Every hand went up except Patricia's and Robert's. They sat frozen, unable to support me but outvoted by the enthusiasm of the other investors. Motion carries, Jonathan said with satisfaction. Miss Hayes, congratulations. Let's build something amazing. I gathered my materials with hands that were shaking just slightly from adrenaline. As the investors filed out, several stopped to congratulate me, to tell me how excited they were about the project. Patricia and Robert left quickly, not looking at me, not speaking to anyone. But I had won. On merit, on talent, on the strength of my work. They had tried to diminish me one more time, and they had failed. The next 18 months were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. The Meridian Complex became my obsession, my proving ground, my masterpiece in progress. I was on site almost every day, working with contractors, solving problems as they arose, making 1,000 tiny decisions that would add up to something beautiful. Simone and Marcus became not just my team, but my friends, people who believed in the vision and pushed themselves as hard as I pushed them. We celebrated small victories, the perfect shade of tile arriving, the custom light fixtures exceeding our expectations, the moment when we finally saw the 3-story living wall installed and realized it was even more stunning than we had imagined. We also weathered setbacks. A shipment of Italian marble arrived damaged. A contractor went bankrupt mid-project. The timeline got compressed when another Sterling Properties project demanded resources. Through it all, we adapted, found solutions, kept moving forward. I occasionally saw Patricia and Robert at investor meetings. They never spoke to me directly, just sat in stony silence while I presented updates. I heard through Jonathan that they had tried to have me removed from the project twice, arguing that I was over budget, I wasn't, or behind schedule, I wasn't. Each time, the other investors had shut them down, satisfied with my progress reports and the quality of the work they could see taking shape. Alexander, I was told, had avoided the project entirely, never attending a single meeting or site visit. I wondered sometimes if he felt any regret, any recognition that he had underestimated me. But mostly, I didn't think about him at all. I was too busy becoming someone he never could have imagined. 14 months into the project, something unexpected happened. I was on site, reviewing the hotel room mock-ups with Simone, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Victoria Hayes? The voice was male, unfamiliar, professional. Speaking. This is David Park from Metropolitan Design Magazine. I'm writing a feature on transformative young designers, and your name keeps coming up. The Meridian Complex is generating a lot of buzz in the industry. Would you be interested in an interview? Metropolitan Design Magazine was the most prestigious design publication in the country. Being featured in it was a career-defining moment. Yes, I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. I'd be very interested. The interview happened 2 weeks later. David Park was thorough and insightful, asking not just about the Meridian Complex, but about my design philosophy, my influences, my journey. I told him about starting small, about the importance of understanding a client's story, about creating spaces that enhanced people's lives rather than just showcasing wealth. I didn't mention the Thorntons. I didn't mention Alexander or my failed marriage or the 3 years I had lost. This story was about my work, my talent, my vision. The personal drama wasn't relevant. The article published 3 months later, just as the Meridian Complex was entering its final phase of construction. The feature was 6 pages with stunning photos of my previous work and renderings of the Meridian Complex. The headline read, Victoria Hayes, Designing Spaces with Soul. David Park had written beautifully about my approach to design, my attention to detail, my ability to balance luxury with warmth. He had interviewed several of my clients, including Carmen, who had given a glowing testimonial. He had talked to other designers who praised my work ethic and creativity. It was the kind of press that changed everything. Within a week of the article publishing, I had inquiries from potential clients across the country. A hotel chain wanting to discuss a multi-property redesign, a tech company looking to design their new headquarters, a celebrity wanting help with their private residence. My small studio suddenly felt very small. The Meridian Complex opened in late spring, 2 years and 3 months after Patricia Thornton had thrown that wine glass at my feet. The grand opening was a spectacular event. City officials, business leaders, society people, design industry professionals all gathered to see what Sterling Properties had created. And what we had created was stunning. The 3-story lobby took everyone's breath away. The living wall was even more impressive in person, a cascade of green that brought life and oxygen into the space. The water features created a sense of tranquility. The custom furniture pieces, the local art installations, the careful lighting design. Everything came together into a cohesive whole that felt both luxurious and welcoming. The hotel floors were already fully booked for the next 3 months. The condos had sold out during pre-construction. Sterling Properties was calling the Meridian Complex the most successful project in their company's history. I stood in that completed lobby on opening night, wearing a designer dress I had actually been able to afford, surrounded by people congratulating me, and felt a sense of accomplishment so profound it was almost overwhelming. I had done this. Me, the woman they had called worthless, barren, a waste of space. I had created something beautiful and functional and successful that would stand in this city for generations. Jonathan Martinez found me near the living wall, holding a glass of champagne. Victoria, you did it. This is extraordinary. Better than I imagined, and I have a pretty good imagination. We did it, I corrected. It took a whole team. But you were the vision, he said, and I want you to know, Sterling Properties wants to work with you again. We have 3 more projects in development, and you're our first choice for all of them. This was it. This was the moment when everything changed. When I went from a designer with potential to a designer with a reputation, with opportunities, with a future that was limited only by my own ambition. That's when I saw them across the lobby. Alexander and Patricia, dressed formally for the occasion, their faces carefully neutral, but their eyes scanning the space with what looked like shock. They hadn't attended any of the preview events or final walkthroughs. This was their first time seeing the completed project. Alexander looked older, stress lines around his eyes, his hairline slightly receded. Patricia looked rigid, her usual composure challenged by whatever she was feeling as she looked at my work, at the success she had tried to prevent. They saw me at the same moment I saw them. For a long beat, we just stared at each other across the crowded lobby. Then Alexander started moving through the crowd toward me, Patricia following. My instinct was to run, to avoid the confrontation, to protect myself from whatever cruelty they might deliver. But I didn't run. I stood my ground, Jonathan beside me, in the lobby I had designed, surrounded by the evidence of everything I had become without them. Alexander reached me first. Up close, I could see he looked tired, unhappy even. Victoria, he said, my name awkward in his mouth after years of not speaking. It's impressive. Truly impressive. Thank you, I said simply, offering nothing more. Patricia caught up, her eyes sweeping over me, taking in the expensive dress, the confident posture, the success that radiated from every part of this space. I underestimated you, she said stiffly, the words clearly costing her something to admit. This project is well executed. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was as close as Patricia Thornton would ever come to admitting she had been wrong. I waited, saying nothing, giving them no assistance with whatever they had come to say. Alexander cleared his throat. I've been following your career. The Metropolitan Design Magazine article was... I showed it to Mother. We both realized that we may have been... That is, we might have acted hastily when our marriage ended. Hastily, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air with all its inadequacy. What Alexander is trying to say, Patricia interjected, her voice regaining some of its usual authority, is that perhaps we could discuss a reconciliation. You've clearly developed into someone of substance. The Thornton family is always interested in associating with talented, successful people. Perhaps we could all move past our previous misunderstandings. I stared at her, genuinely stunned. She thought I would want to come back. She thought that success had been the missing ingredient, that now that I had proven my worth in the only currency they valued, I would be grateful to be welcomed back into their cold, cruel family. Let me make sure I understand, I said, my voice soft but clear. When I was struggling, when I was going through painful fertility treatments, when I was giving up my career, to try to be the wife you demanded, I was worthless. But now that I'm successful, now that I've built something without you, now I'm good enough to be a Thornton again? Alexander had the grace to look uncomfortable. Patricia's expression hardened. Victoria, don't be dramatic. We're offering you a second chance. No, I said, and the simple word felt like freedom. You're asking for one. And the answer is no. I looked at Alexander, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No love, no anger, not even satisfaction at his discomfort. Just a distant sense of gratitude that I had escaped. I don't want to reconcile. I don't want to be part of your family. I don't want anything from either of you except what I've already achieved. The knowledge that every cruel word you said about me was wrong. You're making a mistake, Patricia said, her voice cold now, the brief attempt at warmth gone. You're burning bridges you might need someday. The only bridge I burned was the one that led back to you, I said, and it was the best decision I ever made. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have guests to attend to. Guests who appreciated my work before it was convenient for them to do so. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing in my lobby, surrounded by my success, finally understanding what they had thrown away that night they called me worthless. This is Revenge Stories, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Help us build this community so we can bring more interesting and exciting stories for you from around the world. Your help is much appreciated. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. The months following the Meridian Complex opening were a whirlwind. I moved my design studio to a larger space in a renovated warehouse with proper offices for my growing team. Simone became my creative partner, Marcus my operations manager. We hired 3 more designers, an office manager, and an assistant. Hayes Design Studio was no longer a one-woman operation run from a tiny apartment. It was a real company, creating real opportunities, making real impact. The projects kept coming. A restaurant group wanted us to redesign their flagship location. A museum hired us to reimagine their exhibition spaces. The tech company from before actually followed through, contracting us to design their new headquarters. Each project was larger, more prestigious, more challenging than the last. I bought a house. A real house with 3 bedrooms and a garden and space to breathe. It wasn't as ostentatious as the Thornton estate, but it was mine, truly mine, filled with furniture I had chosen and art I loved and the kind of comfort that came from being exactly who I was without apology. I started teaching a workshop for young designers, especially women and people from underrepresented backgrounds, sharing the lessons I had learned the hard way. Don't make yourself smaller to fit someone else's idea of who you should be, I told them. Don't give up your dreams to support someone who doesn't support yours. Don't ever let anyone tell you that your worth is tied to anything other than your character, your effort, and your heart. One evening, about 6 months after the Meridian Complex opening, I was working late at the studio when my phone rang. Simone's name appeared on the screen. "Please tell me you're not still working," she said when I answered. "Okay, I won't tell you that." "Victoria, it's 8 o'clock on a Friday. You need a life outside of work." "I have a life," I protested. "I have a very fulfilling life." "When's the last time you went on a date?" I thought about it. Define date. "Oh my God," Simone groaned. "You're impossible. Listen, I'm coming to pick you up. We're going to that new wine bar downtown, and you're going to relax and act like a normal human being for a few hours." She hung up before I could argue. An hour later, I found myself at a beautiful wine bar with exposed brick walls and soft jazz playing in the background. Simone ordered us a bottle of wine and made me promise not to talk about work. "So what am I supposed to talk about?" I asked. "Life. Feelings. What makes you happy besides finishing projects on time and under budget?" I sipped my wine, considering the question. "You know what makes me happy? creating spaces where people feel good. That restaurant we just finished? I was there last week just observing, and I saw this couple having dinner. They were celebrating their anniversary, and the woman kept looking around and smiling, like she felt special, like the space was adding to her experience. That's what makes me happy, knowing that my work makes people's lives better, even in small ways. That's beautiful, Simone said. But you deserve to feel special too, not just through your work, through your life, through connections with people who appreciate you for who you are. I have that, I said. I have you. I have my team. I have clients who respect my work. I'm talking about romance, Victoria, about letting someone in again. I shook my head. I'm not ready for that. Maybe I'll never be ready. The Thorntons did a number on me, Simone. The idea of being vulnerable with someone again, of giving someone that kind of power over me, I don't know if I can do it. Not everyone is Alexander, Simone said gently. Not every relationship is a trap. You deserve love, real love, from someone who sees your value and celebrates it instead of trying to diminish it. Maybe, I said. But right now, I'm content. I'm building something I'm proud of. I'm helping other designers find their footing. I'm creating beauty in the world. That's enough. And it was enough for a long time. I poured myself into my work, into my studio, into mentoring young designers. I found satisfaction and meaning in what I was creating. The emptiness I had felt in my marriage was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and accomplishment. Then, nearly 3 years after that terrible dinner with the Thorntons, I got a phone call that brought everything full circle. "Miss Hayes, this is Margaret Chen from the estate of Patricia Thornton." My hand tightened on the phone. "I'm sorry, what?" "Mrs. Patricia Thornton passed away last week. As the executor of her estate, I'm contacting you because you're mentioned in her will." I felt dizzy, disconnected. Patricia was dead? And she had mentioned me in her will? I don't understand. Why would I be in her will? I'm not at liberty to discuss the details over the phone. Could you come to our office tomorrow at 2 o'clock? I almost said no. I almost told Margaret Chen that I wanted nothing from Patricia Thornton, not even in death. But curiosity got the better of me. What could Patricia possibly have left me? What final cruelty was waiting? The law office was in one of those old buildings downtown with marble floors and wood-paneled walls, the kind of place that radiated old money and established power. Margaret Chen turned out to be a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to a chair. "I know this must be strange for you. That's one word for it." Margaret opened a file and pulled out a document. Mrs. Thornton updated her will 3 months before her death. She left specific instructions regarding you. Before I share them, I want to show you something. She pulled out a magazine, Metropolitan Design Magazine, the issue with my feature. It was worn, the pages dog-eared, highlighting throughout. My interview, my photos, my work, all marked up with handwritten notes in margins. "Mrs. Thornton read this article repeatedly," Margaret said. "She kept it on her bedside table. She showed it to friends, to family. She was, I believe, trying in her own way to understand what she had lost." I stared at the magazine, at Patricia's handwriting noting details about my projects, circling quotes I had given about design philosophy. It was so strange, so unexpected, seeing evidence that Patricia had paid attention to my life after I left it. "Mrs. Thornton was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago," Margaret continued. "She fought it aggressively, but ultimately she knew she was losing. In her final months, she did a lot of reflection. She wrote you a letter." Margaret handed me an envelope, heavy paper with my name written in Patricia's distinctive, elegant script. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Victoria, the letter began. I am dying, and that fact has forced me to confront truths I spent a lifetime avoiding. The primary truth is this: I was wrong about you, profoundly, cruelly wrong. I built my life around the idea that worth came from bloodlines, from maintaining appearances, from producing the right kind of heirs to carry on the family name. I measured everyone by these shallow, meaningless standards. When you couldn't give us a grandchild, I dismissed you as worthless. I never considered that the failure might be on our side, in values and character, in our inability to recognize quality when it was living in our guest house. I watched Alexander lose the only genuine person in his life because I taught him to value the wrong things. I watched you build an extraordinary career and become exactly the kind of woman I should have celebrated instead of demeaning. I watched you succeed in ways my family never could, with integrity and authenticity we never possessed. This is not an apology I expect you to accept. The damage I did cannot be undone with words on paper written when I have nothing left to lose. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see what we threw away. I see what we lost. I see you, Victoria Hayes, perhaps for the first time, and what I see is everything I failed to be. Talented, principled, brave enough to walk away from cruelty, even when it meant walking toward uncertainty. I am leaving you something in my will, not as reparation. Nothing could repair what was broken, but as acknowledgement. You were right. We were wrong. That matters, even if it's too late for it to mean anything. I hope your life continues to be extraordinary. I hope you never waste another moment of it on people like us, Patricia Thornton. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling a complex tangle of emotions. Vindication, yes. Sadness, surprisingly. Anger that it had taken death for her to see clearly. And finally, a kind of closure I hadn't known I needed. "What did she leave me?" I asked Margaret, my voice rough. $50,000, Margaret said, with instructions that it be used to fund scholarships for design students from underprivileged backgrounds. She wanted you to manage the fund, to choose the recipients, to invest in young designers the way she failed to invest in you. I sat back in the chair, stunned. It was so unexpected, so thoughtful, so unlike the Patricia I had known, but perhaps in her final months facing her own mortality, she had finally become someone different, someone capable of seeing beyond her own narrow worldview. "Will you accept it?" Margaret asked. "There are no strings attached. You're free to refuse." I thought about all the young designers I had been mentoring, the ones struggling to make it in an industry that often favored connections over talent. I thought about the woman I had been before I met Alexander, working 3 jobs to pay for design school, scraping by on cheap coffee and big dreams. "I'll accept it," I said. "I'll make sure it goes to designers who need it, who have the talent but not the advantages. I'll make sure Patricia's money does some good in the world." Margaret smiled. "I think she would have appreciated that. She said in her instructions that you would know how to use it well, that you understood the value of opportunity because you had to fight so hard for yours." I left the law office with the letter in my purse and a certified check for $50,000 in my hand. I sat in my car for a long time, just processing everything. Patricia Thornton, the woman who had tormented me, had spent her dying months trying to understand what she had lost. She had left me not just money, but acknowledgement, validation, a final admission that I had been right all along. It wasn't the kind of revenge I had once imagined, back in those early days of hurt and anger. It was something more complicated and more complete. She had been forced to watch me succeed, to see me become everything she had claimed I could never be. And in the end, she had to admit it, in writing, preserved in her will, a permanent record of her wrongness and my worth. I started the Hayes Foundation for Emerging Designers the following month. The application process focused on talent, potential, and financial need, with no consideration for family connections or pedigree. I personally reviewed every portfolio, looking for that spark of creativity, that unique vision that just needed support to flourish. The first year, we awarded 5 scholarships of $10,000 each. I met each recipient personally, told them their work was valuable, that they were talented, that they should never let anyone make them feel less than worthy. I saw myself in each of them, and I was determined to give them the encouragement I had to find for myself. As for Alexander and the rest of the Thornton family, I heard things occasionally through the industry grapevine. The commercial development business was struggling, making poor investments, losing ground to more innovative competitors. Alexander had divorced and remarried, this time to someone from an appropriate family, someone who had given him the heir he wanted. I felt nothing when I heard that news, except perhaps a brief moment of pity for his new wife, trapped in the same gilded cage I had escaped. I never remarried. I dated occasionally, but I was careful, protective of the life I had built. I refused to shrink myself again for anyone. The right person, I figured, would celebrate my success, not feel threatened by it. Until that person appeared, I was content with my work, my friendships, my purpose. 5 years after that terrible dinner, I was invited to speak at a design conference, a keynote address to hundreds of industry professionals. I talked about my journey, about starting small and building big, about the importance of maintaining your integrity even when it would be easier to compromise. I talked about creating spaces with soul, about the responsibility designers have to make the world not just more beautiful, but more just, more accessible, more humane. I didn't talk about the Thorntons by name, but I did say this. There will be people in your life who tell you that you're not good enough, that you don't belong, that you should give up on your dreams. Sometimes those people will be strangers. Sometimes they'll be family. Sometimes they'll be people you love. And it will hurt. It will make you doubt yourself. It will make you want to prove them wrong through sheer force of success. But here's what I learned. The best revenge isn't proving them wrong. The best revenge is becoming so authentically, completely yourself that their opinions become irrelevant. Build a life you're proud of. Create work that matters. Treat people with kindness and respect. Success that comes from that foundation is unshakable, and the people who doubted you, eventually they become just a footnote in your story. An obstacle you overcame on the way to becoming who you were always meant to be. The applause that followed was thunderous. After the talk, dozens of people came up to thank me, to share their own stories of doubt and perseverance, to tell me that my words had resonated. Among them was a young woman with nervous hands and hopeful eyes. "Miss Hayes, I'm Daniela Ortiz. I'm a first-year design student, and I just wanted to thank you for the scholarship, the Hayes Foundation scholarship. Without it, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be studying design at all. You changed my life." I hugged her, this young woman whose talent I had seen in her portfolio, whose potential I had invested in just as someone should have invested in me. "You changed your own life, Daniela. You did the work. You created the portfolio that earned that scholarship. I just removed one barrier. The rest is all you." "Still," she said, her eyes bright with tears, "thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for making this possible." That moment, right there, was worth more than any revenge I could have plotted. It was the revenge of paying it forward, of taking the pain I had experienced and transforming it into opportunity for others. The Thorntons had tried to make me small, to crush my spirit, to cast me out as worthless. Instead, they had freed me to become someone who could open doors for others, who could create beauty and opportunity and hope. I stand now in my design studio, surrounded by the work of my talented team, looking at the portfolio of our completed projects, hotels and restaurants and museums and homes, each one a testament to the power of creative vision combined with dedication and heart. I am successful, yes, but more importantly, I am free. Free from the need for their approval, free from the shame they try to impose, free to be exactly who I am. Sometimes, late at night when I'm working on a new design, I think about that dinner, that moment when Patricia threw the wine glass and screamed at me to get out. I think about how terrified I was, how lost I felt, how certain I was that being cast out from their family was the worst thing that could happen. And I smile, because being cast out was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to find my own strength, to build my own life, to discover that I didn't need their validation or their approval or their name. I needed only myself, my talent, my determination, and the courage to keep going, even when I wasn't sure where I was going. The Thorntons thought they were punishing me that night. They thought they were destroying me, throwing away someone worthless. Instead, they set me free, and in doing so, they guaranteed their own defeat. Because the woman they cast out became someone extraordinary, not despite their rejection, but in many ways because of it. That's the ultimate irony, the final twist in this story. They gave me the greatest gift they possibly could, though they never intended to. They gave me back to myself. This is Revenge Stories, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Help us build this community so we can bring more interesting and exciting stories for you from around the world. Your help is much appreciated. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that you are worth more than anyone's low opinion of you. You are capable of more than the people who try to limit you can imagine. And sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you could never have predicted. My name is Victoria Hayes. I am the woman they threw away, and I became the woman they could never diminish, no matter how hard they tried.